it's all in there.
Yeah.
Well, the bear that we're talking about tonight is book 3 of the Odyssey, and we're back, Jay and Paul here, covering the Odyssey book by book. And
Yep.
we've done an introduction. We've done book 1, book 2. We hope you've worked through those, and we're into book 3 too. And we want to walk through them with things that we've done. And ways to bring this into your class, because it's a good book to bring in your class, as Jay was just discussing. And we're talking about any level of students, really, from students who, Jay was talking about students who cannot sit and look at the book for a minute, literally without darting off. I've got the same kind of things. I have students who get up and stand, and, as long as they're not, messing up the class, I let them go. I let them get up and walk. They stand over and lean against the wall and hold their book. Fun, I identify with that personally, deeply, and nevertheless, it is a book that students settle into, and for whom a great deal of the story, against all odds, actually works. So that's encouragement. Notes from the field. Jay and I are out there on the front lines. With students. Trying this stuff out, and it's nice, Jay. I know you have students at different levels, so you can try this out. You have your high performing students, and then you have your students who are still trying to have those successful experiences of just getting through books. And so it's nice to try it against each of them, and and I'm in the same circumstance. So, all right, we want to start with a poem.
You have one?
Yeah, I do,
Nice.
and. What impresses me most about chapter 3 is the religion and the pagan religiosity. If you want to know, again, how the Odyssey is sort of a Bible, for Greek religion, as I've said before, is, it tells you lots of things you need to know about the gods, and also tells you how to sacrifice to them if you need to know. So if you're wondering how to set one of these things up, in your backyard. Book 3 gives you a lot of instruction, and it's expensive.
You might want a trigger warning, Paul. I know you're into trigger warnings.
Yeah.
If you're a vegan watching this, probably not. I don't know. There might be a moment where there are. I mean, my students. One of my guys who's Greek. One of my guys, Pete, asked, "Is all they eat beef?" Like he asked the other day. And because I'm the teacher, we ended up talking about steak restaurants we liked, and the class got kind of moved. They know how to get me off topic. But anyway.
No, it's a fair topic for this book. It's a big steak cookout here, really.
Yeah.
That's probably a sacrilegious way of putting it. Primarily, it's prayer to the gods, or to the God that matters. And that's Poseidon, by the way. And there's lots of good details in that. Anyway, while I was thinking about that, I thought, what's a good, I like American lit a lot. What's a good American religion pagan poem, And for me, the American religion really is transcendentalism, honestly. And, our critic who we mentioned a lot, Harold Bloom, that's probably the first book of his I read. I was in college. I don't know how I came across it because I had no idea who he was or even how to read anything he wrote. But he did write a book called The American Religion, and it's very good. And I've gone on to teach transcendentalism and the transcendentalists, and I really do think that's sort of the core of what's uniquely a uniquely American version of Christianity. Anyway, I found a poem by E. Cummings, who I've read a bit. He was born in Cambridge, Mass., not too far from where you are sitting right now, Jay. And his father was a Unitarian pastor, and Unitarianism is the church of transcendentalism. And so you find his religious expression in his poems. So I thought a parallel poem for a very religious chapter, chapter 3 of the Odyssey, I would read tonight. I thank you, God, for most this amazing. I thank you, God, for most this amazing, by E. Cummings. I thank you, God, for most this amazing day, for the leaping greenly spirits of trees and a blue true dream of sky, and for everything which is natural, which is infinite, which is yes. I who have died am alive again today, and this is the sun's birthday. This is the birthday of life and of love and wings and of the gay great happening illimitably earth. How should tasting, touching, hearing, seeing, breathing, any, lifted from the no of all nothing, human merely being, doubt unimaginable you? Now the ears of my ears awake, and now the eyes of my eyes are opened. That's I Thank You, God, for Most This Amazing by Cummings.
That's a good one. Never heard that one. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a nice sort of invocation, maybe a prayer to God in a most fundamental sense that I think possibly a Greek sitting around a fire with E. Cummings might appreciate.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So there's a poem on topic, on theme, I think, for book 3, my translation. It's titled The Lord of the Western Approaches. As we left off in book 2, Telemachus is off and running. He's up. He's active at the instigation of Mentor, Athena, and the guise of Mentor. He's taken off to take action, to no longer just sit around and let bad things happen, but to see what he can do, and also possibly to win some fame in the world for his own name, as Agamemnon's son did, as we're reminded over and over, and that comes up again in book 3. So he's off and sailing down to sandy Pylos to see old Nestor. He was in the battle, and he came back from the war and made it. And maybe he knows something. Maybe he saw something that happened. And this is Telemachus's first stop to gather information. All right, how do you want to jump into this, Jay? What are you thinking?
Just a quick a summary of just some plot points that I think any treatment of book 3 would at least mention. As you said, this is the beginning of Telemachus leaving home. I think it's, since we're teaching teenagers, and most of the time people experience this book for the first time as teenagers, one of the conversations that often comes up organically is, to what extent does one need to leave what's familiar in order to grow up? And Telemachus has to change addresses for a while, it seems, to grow as a human being. And it isn't simply that he has this particular concrete task to search for information. There's something about being around different people with different stories and different maybe ways of eating and associating with each other. And a lot of us have that experience, maybe going to college or getting married and intersecting with a different family, or maybe moving to a different part of the country. Yeah. So anyway, it can afford some interesting personal narrative opportunities for first-time readers. It's reasonable before book 3 to ask students, when was the first time you realized that there was a world outside of your house? You know what I mean? And a lot of kids will talk about vacation, or it could be any of these things. But anyway, I think that's just important to mention. He learns stories. He gets nothing what he asked for in terms of data about Odysseus, but he learns about the feuding between Menelaus and his brother Agamemnon, who was the king of all the Greeks. And then something I want to talk about, the story that haunts this entire poem, which is Aegisthus's murder of Agamemnon after Agamemnon comes home from war. And it ends clearly with Nestor treating this kid, Telemachus, really well, and you get a sense he's going to be okay there as long as he's there. He even gives stuff, right? He gives a chariot, gifts, and even his own son, Pisistratus, is allowed to go with Telemachus for the rest of the journey. So anyway, that's like a very surface level, the nuts and bolts of just the plot of book 4. But it's the beginning of Telemachus's world getting a little bit larger than his hometown. And I think that's an easy hook for first-time readers, especially if they're kids, I think.
Yeah, that's good too. And it's not too application-y, really. It's really on topic, I think. It's very much a part of the plot, because the book opens as soon as they get there. Telemachus practically loses heart. He realizes, like you say, this is maybe the first time he's been away from home, and he doesn't know how to talk to people, away from home. He's never interviewed anyone, much less a king, before. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what to say, and so he almost kind of backs out, really, in the beginning of the chapter. So what you're saying is on the page. Telemachus comes to realize, I don't know what to say, and he says this to Mentor. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to talk to anyone, any of these people. And
Mhm.
mentor says, hey, not a time for being bashful or shy here. Step up
Yeah.
and don't worry about it. Your reason and your instincts will kick in, and your heart, your humanness. Just speak out of your, he says basically, speak out of your heart and out of your mind, and you'll be fine. But step up. It's time. And so, yes, that's it's a good hook, like you say, for our own students, especially when we do this in ninth grade. A lot of times we've done a coming of age kind of theme, so we've talked about in ninth grade. I
Mhm.
think it's very commonly done in high school, and this just fits, hand in glove with it. So, yeah, I think that's very much on topic.
Hmm.
Telemachus pops in. I also like the point that you make, and I would like to emphasize this is a fun theme. I don't know if it's a theme or a motif, maybe, of people not getting what they're asking for, or things
Yeah.
not. There's a whole elaborate chapter here with lots of interaction and information, but it's not exact. It's not directly. It's
Right.
indirectly always some kind of further. I mean, he leaves with an idea for a place to go to get more information. Nestor tells him, "Why don't you go on and talk to Menelaus? Not that far away. You can drive over
Mhm.
there." I think he was the last one home. He could probably tell you something like this. And
Yep.
yeah, it's great. But as far as if Telemachus is taking notes on what does Nestor know about Dad, there are no notes in that column. There's nothing.
Mhm.
Nothing there. He gives an
And
elaborate story.
just to preview this, my homework question after book 3 is book 3, it doesn't achieve its goals. It doesn't give Telemachus data about Odysseus. So why is it there? And I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of interesting possible answers. You and I are probably going to delve into them. But just as dealing with amateur readers reading a difficult text, it's a good object lesson in that difficult texts are nuanced and layered, and not every layer looks really obviously important in real time as you read it. And
Hmm.
sometimes you have to wait. I think we're used to, kids particularly would be used to a show on Netflix or a film with where the first 40 minutes you're not exactly sure why things are happening the way they are, but because you've watched a lot of Netflix shows, you just sort of trust the process. But in books, so often, Paul, right? Kids get impatient and want to know all the answers right away. And that's just not how these things work. And it's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay to say that. And, he
Yeah.
doesn't get what he wants in book 3. So let's just presume. I always tell students, when you're in the hands of a great writer, presume everything matters until you have a reason not to presume it.
Yes, yeah, and hang on
Yeah.
and wait. And I'm always pushing
Yeah.
back against that. That impatience that expresses itself in Googling. Where you
Yeah.
ask,
Yeah.
"Why is book 3 here?" And
Right.
start reading up. That's not reading. That's not reading the book. That's reading something else.
Right.
But that's not It's not what we mean by reading. By just sitting with it,
Yep.
developing trust of the author, as you say, and then
Mhm.
sort of keeping track in your mind of these things that I need answers about. I need to follow up on
Mhm.
and that you can call the author to task on, in the end, and maybe you don't get an answer. And you say, "Look, I got this against Homer. I felt jerked around,
Huh.
by the story. There's way too
Yeah.
many,
Yeah.
dead ends, and that's fair enough. It's fair enough
Yep.
to have." And I'm always telling students again, put your questions in your book, buy a paperback, mark it up, make this
Yeah.
a journal. Maybe you'll throw it away. Okay, fine. But maybe not. Maybe this will
Mhm.
be a journal of your first reading of this book. And hopefully it is
Yep.
only your first reading, meaning there'll be more. And you can come back to yourself and revisit yourself in the book and see the questions you had and the things. This is a book that's well worth journaling your life into, in a sense, tracking yourself by, tracking your understanding, your skill
Mhm.
as a reader, your questions as a human being. Put them in these pages and hang on to them. I'm always sort of pushing this, and this is one of those easy ways to do it. Why is this chapter here? Sort of question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think yes, and I asked that too in preparing for this episode tonight, and I think I would generalize by there's a plot thing that's going on here that I think is happening, which again is indirect, and then there is a sort of I don't know, a dramatic thing happening too. I feel like there is a building of expectation that's happening around essentially Odysseus, around the meeting of Odysseus. There's some tension. The points of tension are this thing that's going on back home. Is this just going to go on and keep happening? Telemachus says in this chapter he can't imagine it not happen. He can't imagine it going away. He can't imagine him setting, the house in order, or the house being set in order again at all. So there's tension around that. There's tension around, Telemachus's success. And then also about, and this is maybe a third or fourth reading sort of tension, but tension about Odysseus. Who is this guy? And Telemachus articulates some of this, but as a reader, maybe we know, we think we're supposed to know he's a hero. He's going to come through or something. But if you let yourself walk with Telemachus, and especially if you don't know the book, you don't know that. You don't know, and especially in every age has its right to be critical. But in our critical age, you're asking, is Odysseus actually a respectable person? I think
it's a fair question.
It's a fair question. It's a fair question.
Right.
You should ask that all the way. Just because he was venerated in another time, are we going to venerate him now? And so we don't know that. And I think that tension is building in the story, and it is building in this chapter because we hear someone who knows Odysseus talk about him. Now, that's not the final word. Nestor doesn't have the final word on anyone, but one of the ways a writer builds a character is by testimonial, by other characters, what other characters say about a person. So we do have that. We do have that. And so there's the development of tension around Odysseus, around Telemachus. And then also there's just this backfilling, I think, of the story of what was the Trojan War? What happened there? How do people who were in it feel about it? It's really nice to hear Nestor talk about what it was like to be there on the battlefield. Yeah. And how he thinks, we know this Greek culture as being a warrior culture. Think of it being rah-rah, for honor and glory on the battlefield. And I think that's all true. But also, he's like, it's awful. It's awful. The people we lost, you can't believe it, And his own son, one of his own sons, dies there. Yeah. That's not just nothing, that's not just funny or, it happens kind of thing. I think you get that strong sense. So I think there's this tension thing that's building. And then there is this backfilling of plot stuff about the Trojan War and how that thing worked. And then
what's important too, in light of what you're saying, is there's a double tension. There's the tension of we're trying to read these moments and learn about them. Is this tension and ambiguity? The same exact thing lives inside of Telemachus, who knows nothing. He knows what we know. Yeah. So it's almost like we're method reading when we read of Telemachus experiencing this, because we are experiencing it. When he's confused, we're confused. When he's shocked at the realism of the pain of war trauma, we are too. Why would he know about that? The only men he's ever been around are suitors who haven't done anything. They don't even make dinner, for God's sake, never mind fight. So the previous generation of men are all dead. So he doesn't know. This is all shocking. So whatever we're feeling in these moments as we're learning about this is what he's feeling. That's part of the brilliance of Telemachus.
And I try to drive my students down that path. Let's walk with Telemachus. And as soon as, if someone steps out and starts saying, well, it'll all be all right, or some version of it, it'll all be all right, Odysseus, like, you don't know that? How do you know that?
No, he's not holding a book. He's not holding a book with that many more pages in it, knowing a bunch of other things going to happen.
Yes.
Anybody in this book could die right now. That's what they're thinking.
Right. That's right. And that's basically is the expectation. And so I like to try to drive my students into Telemachus's position and create some doubt around them. Emphasize his doubt, which I think surprises them. That line we pointed out before in book 1, I think it is, where he says, "They say I'm his son, but I don't know. Who can know?" That's right. I think that's a surprising line. So I push into that. There's another one like that in this book too, where Athena gets kind of upset. Telemachus says on the same thing. It's line 245 in my translation. Yeah. But prudently Telemachus replied, "I can't think what you say will ever happen." This is after Nestor says, "Oh, I've heard about the suitors and all this, and hopefully one day this gets set right." Mm-hmm. Telemachus says, "I can't think what you say will ever happen, sir. It's a dazzling hope, but not for me. It could not be, even if the gods willed it." Wow. Yep. All right. So again, if you think, it'll all just end out right. We know how these play out. They don't. And Telemachus says, even in the face of the gods, really, he says, even if the gods willed it, I can't see that happen. And I believe him when he sees that. This is the reality he's grown up with. This is total mess, and his house being plundered and his family being taken advantage of. And that's the norm, and that's all he can see.
Right.
So yeah, it's a good drawing into that. Now, Athena kind of rebukes him after that and says, wow, what strange talk you permit yourself, Telemachus.
Right.
A god could do it. He could save the man simply by wishing it. But it's an interesting line. He says, though, if I were Odysseus, Athena talking, I should prefer to suffer years at sea and then be safe at home. Better that than a knife at the hearthside where Agamemnon found it, killed by adulterers. And then this story is brought back up, which is developed a little more in this chapter. But to that point of going down the path of with Telemachus, this tension point, I think it is good to draw readers into it, help them to identify with Telemachus. Yeah.
Right. Do you have an essential quotation from book 3, or did you already kind of touch on that?
I like that one, the strange talk one. That one is kind of essential. I also like to point out in the beginning, again, to this thing I know we've talked about before already, but when Telemachus arrives, there's already a huge sacrifice going on the beach. But the way that the stranger or the guest, which is a motif in this book, is treated in the story again happens as it happens throughout the story. As soon as Nestor or his sons see strangers arrive, they sort of drop everything and invite them in, and they feed them, they give them a place to sit, they give them something to drink, and then after all that is done, then they say, "Oh, now it's time." Now it's time to talk. And I like these lines. They say, they feasted, and when they had eaten and drunk their fill, at last they heard from Nestor, Prince of Charioteers. Now is the time, he said, for a few questions. So it always comes after. And when they had their fill of food and wine, then we're like, oh, all right, so, who are you? And why are you here? And you expect, well, I'm a mass murderer. I drive around killing people who invite me to their table without asking. Really?
Funny you mention. Yeah.
So, I'm like, oh, really? Oh, I guess we shouldn't have invited you in. That never happens. They always just invite them in,
Right. Nothing to see here.
Exactly. And then clear-headed Telemachus responds carefully. So, I like this motif of welcoming, of hospitality. And then I think, the core quote I have here is Telemachus's uncertainty about what's going to happen, and him expressing it, saying, I can't see this being otherwise. And Nestor doesn't make any promises. He's like, it'll be fine. He doesn't do that either. He doesn't blow that off. He says, well, we'd hope to see that happen. And later he says, I can see when Athena, kind of weirdly, I think, sort of shows herself when she disappears, Athena / mentor. Nestor comments, says, "Oh, I see that Athena loves you like she loves Odysseus. You'll be fine." He does get that reassurance, but not that everything will be set. Not that everything will be set right. So I don't know. I like that line, strange talk, coming from you, Telemachus. I don't know. What did you land on?
I had the Aegisthus thing, and again, just trying to think about making confident readers. I have some students that struggle, and to get them to see echoes and patterns in a difficult book is really great. I just did Hamlet a little while ago, and there's all the father-son resonance and echoes in Hamlet. And that's just a really interesting lens through which to read that difficult text, is the father and son lens. And here, not only in the characters, but even in some of the biblical allusions. But anyway, here, the Aegisthus story is mentioned in book 1. It's mentioned here. It's over and over and over again. And Nestor is talking to this boy about the Trojan War. And what story does he dedicate the most text to? It isn't about the glory of war. It isn't about the Trojan horse, which must have been amazing. The end of 10 years. I think of, that famous picture on the street in America in World War I with the soldier and the girl kissing at the end of World War II. I mean, the black and white photo, right? The famous picture. It must have felt so celebratory and glorious to know that 10 years of hand-to-hand combat was over. Nope, not what he's telling about. He's talking, and I think the Emily Wilson translation is about 40 or 50 lines ahead. So when I tell you it's line 252 or 3, it's the beginning of a stanza, and it said, Geranian Nestor, Lord of Horses, answered. The question is Telemachus asking, how did King Agamemnon die, and where was Menelaus, and what happened here and there and here? But he focuses on Agamemnon. Nestor says, Lord of Horses answered, I'll tell everything, though you can guess what would have happened if fair Menelaus had found Aegisthus living in his halls on his return.
Yeah.
And then 5 or 6 lines down, while we fought and labored at Troy, this layabout, Aegisthus, sat safe in Argos, seducing Clytemnestra, noble wife of Agamemnon. And I just want to say, our school put on Iphigenia, the play, and you probably know from before the Trojan War that Agamemnon had to sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia,
right,
to please the gods in order to sail to Troy, which, safe to say, slightly bothered Clytemnestra. So
she seemed to hold a grudge somehow.
She seemed very sensitive, Clytemnestra. And so the source material is torn as to, is Aegisthus the murderer? Is Clytemnestra the murderer? Was she getting revenge on her husband for killing their kid? So once you start digging into the origin stories of whether it's Circe, whether it's all these characters, they're always rich and interesting, not just there's no stick figures. Even the characters that are villainous, that you can kind of wrestle with it. Anyway, So the rest is, for a while, Clytemnestra scorned his foul suggestions since her heart was good. So she didn't commit adultery for a while. I don't know what a while is. Moreover, when her husband went to Troy, he left a poet ordered to protect her. But finally, fate, and I'm going to talk about fate for my surprising quote, forced the queen to yield.
Mm.
So in a couple of different translations, the wording is different. But what's clear is that it wasn't Clytemnestra making an immoral choice. Clytemnestra is moved by fate, which she cannot change. The gods can't change the fates. And I'm going to talk about that later. Aegisthus left the poet to be eaten by birds. That'll teach you to be a poet, Paul. Abandoned on a desert island. He led the woman back to his own house. And then he has a long tangent and skip a stanza. And I'm almost done. Meanwhile, at home, Aegisthus had been plotting. He killed the son of Atreus, Agamemnon, seized control of rich Mycenae, where he reigned for 7 years. So this guy is adulterous 7 years, the sort of Claudius of the gang, right?
Right.
In the 8th, Orestes, and you could read the Oresteia, a great Greek text about the revenge of Orestes, came to destroy him. So eventually the moral, this is really blunt, and it's nice when really difficult texts just hand you this. I remember that line in Hamlet where he looks at Ophelia and says, I did love you once. All my students love that because they know what that means. It's here, Nestor says, the moral is you must not stay away too long, dear boy, when those proud suitors lurk inside your house. They may divide your wealth. So it's no, you have to take care of your house, because look what happens when you don't take care of your house.
Yeah.
So I think that not only is the poem anxious about fidelity, and particularly the fidelity of women to men, because it's not really an issue if men are unfaithful in this poem, but it's a real issue if women are unfaithful. Mm-hmm. And we know the poem is anxious about it, but Nestor himself is anxious to tell Telemachus about it. So on every level, there's a lot of anxiety about fidelity, and particularly this particular story, because Agamemnon is the king of the whole Greek force, the highest higher up, and this happened to him.
Yeah, it's shocking. It's shocking. It's the last person it should happen to. And so, this repeat of the story just plays over and over, especially later in the book when Odysseus comes back home, and the excessive carefulness he takes. The poet reminds you of this. Well, don't forget, even the likes of Agamemnon, Odysseus's general, essentially the guy above him, was not careful enough. He just bombed in honey, I'm home. I know you've missed me deeply, and
Yeah.
it just wasn't true. Um, yeah, it's good. You're right. There is when in each of these stories give, the more you dig in, as you're saying, the more they give. So if you look into this and see, well, what kind of person was Clytemnestra? And then let's say you stumble on that story of Iphigenia and you think, oh man, it's very easy to believe that that's fated. The Fitzgerald translation just said, then came the fated hour when she gave in,
Which is slightly gentler towards the fates and
Yeah.
more harsh. And this
And
is really getting into the weeds. But that doesn't let Clytemnestra off the hook, like saying fate forced the queen to yield. So it'd be interesting to know the Greek there.
it would, because Fitzgerald is say it is a fated hour, meaning I don't know
Yeah.
exactly what it means, but it is fateful. I mean, a lot turns on this. She gives in finally. I always have read it as, and I haven't read the Greek, but I've always read it as Clytemnestra is. I think she is keyed up to kill Agamemnon no matter what. The only question was she going to hook up with this guy, and use him? I feel like she's using him, to complete her own purposes, because she never forgave and never forgot, what Agamemnon did. And should she have? Absolutely not.
Right. And we can get into the weeds on this. And I think with first-time kids reading this for the first time, always remembering that it's a story within a story. It's a framed tale, and we should be paying really close attention to what this kid, he's a kid, how this kid is responding to all of this new information.
Yes. Well, exactly. That's the thread you can stick with. Again, it's tracking down, try to see it through Telemachus's eyes. Maybe he doesn't know really these stories at all. Nestor says, "Oh, I'm sure you've heard of Agamemnon. Everyone has." Well, maybe he's heard of it, but maybe that's it. But the least that it does is what he keeps hearing everyone say is, by implication, Telemachus, you're up. You're up. There's something bad happening in your house. Look what these other guys. Look what this other guy has done. To fix his own father's household. It's at the very least, it's this responsibility or sense of duty or pressure. That's introduced to Telemachus. So that you can stick with.
I want to throw this out, and I haven't thought of it. Something you and I have been talking about have made me think of it. I mentioned earlier on that the suitors, while villainous, the Ithacan suitors, while villainous, clearly villainous and impious, also are speaking to the fact that there's a leadership vacancy, which in this universe is incredibly dangerous. So there is a reason for one of them to marry, right? Penelope.
Yeah.
One wonders, and I don't know the story well enough, but one wonders, Clytemnestra's home alone for a decade. There's a leadership vacancy. This guy ends up taking over after Agamemnon comes home, right? And he rules for 7 years. Now he's avenged and died. How bad could it have been? Like, was he a bad ruler even? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer to that.
Right. But the 7 years, I read that as it just is just wait, like Orestes just isn't there. He's gone, and he comes back. I don't know why he's gone. But 7 long years with Agamemnon dead, he held the people down before the vengeance. I mean, that's not a really nice line, not like he ruled in greatness or something. But in the 8th year, back from exile in Attica. So I don't know this backstory. Maybe Orestes was exiled, sent off, to make sure that he didn't try to pull any, and that he doesn't try to do what he did. He makes his way back. But you're saying, how bad could it have been? How bad was it?
Well, I'm not saying he was, Alfred the Great. I'm just saying, like, I don't know about this person. You know what I mean? It's their first time reading their stick figures, but after a while you're like, well, who knows the complexity of the situation of the kingdom without a king? And then he comes back. But I mean, this is the guy that killed her daughter. Like, so anyway, I mentioned this because clearly you and I are wrestling with this, and you and I have read this a million times. Telemachus has never read the Odyssey. He could use a copy of it, actually. And he's a kid who's never known his dad. He knows his dad probably from legend only. Now he's talking to a guy who knew his dad. This is what he's listening to. Imagine what he's thinking. Imagine now that, like, he's just worried about one particular woman in one particular town. And now he's realizing that the nature of these relationships themselves are often treacherous and complicated. It isn't simply my mom's sad, my mom's in trouble. It's, no, this is troublesome as a situation globally.
Yes, right. It's caused enormous amount of problems. And you could get lost. Not only could we get lost in the weeds of the story, Telemachus, any actor, anyone who wants to grow up and take on responsibility, which are coterminous things, I think, is seeing the world around you, that it's just not battery operated, that someone didn't just click on, but that you have a role in it, in keeping it rolling, and you're trying to figure out what your role is. Telemachus could get lost in it and not find it.
Right.
And so there are questions of a lack of leadership. Every time there's no lack of leadership, it's dangerous, Yeah. And in every world at every time. That the suitors have an argument. They do have an argument. But the point, and I think this is good too for our students to drive at them, trying to understand all the historical problems, all the political, nuances, even if political just means your own family, let's say, nothing broader than that. That's hard enough. But what, and you may never do it, but what you can drive at is, and this is what Telemachus, I think, keeps coming back to him, is what do I have to do? What is my responsibility? And you get from the story, and these wise men, or the men who speak to him anyway in the story, keep telling him, you need to set the wrong right. If your arrestees, maybe his dad wasn't, he knows his dad killed his sister. Maybe it just wasn't that bad of a king. But it doesn't matter. What matters is, what do you have to do? If someone defiles your family, let's say, then your job is to take care of that. And so take it on and do that with the God's help, as much as possible. Take it on. So it's like, it's weeding through, all of the distractions and all the stories that Telemachus is aware of, and finding the thing that you're responsible to. And I love, I love this, that Homer doesn't make it just a straightforward thing. The fact that Agamemnon is kind of awful, really. I mean, he's awful. His move, killing Iphigenia is pretty hard to justify. It seems like just a political move. He's about to lose the coalition. He's going to lose his leadership. They've got to get going. And so he does a horrifying thing, that kind of piece. So it's not a black and white story.
What about your surprising quotation, a surprising quotation from book 3?
Yeah.
I just have a word. It's not even a quotation, but.
Do you really?
Yeah, well, do you want to go?
I don't know. I don't have anything too surprising. The only other
I have a little thing, and this probably actually connects to your notion of religion. So we probably could just chat about this, but
let's do that, because we haven't really talked about the religion part, and that's what I always remember from this chapter most, just about.
Well, I'm going to connect this, if you don't mind, to my link. We have always obviously important quotations. We have surprising quotation. We have lingering question, and it's kind of connected to that too. But it's this whole idea of fate that comes up a few times, in that, the fates were actually 3 women. The fates, or the morai, the word means to share or portion, like to apportion out people's fates, right?
Right.
So this is like the audience of this poem had this notion that there was a fate called Clotho.
Yes.
And she would spin the thread of your fate. Lachesis, who would measure out how long your life would be. And then Atropos, the inflexible. I love that. I have some family members that have that epithet. No, I'm joking. And Phyllis, the inflexible. She's a lot of fun at parties, but she chooses the timing and manner of your death. So this character is fascinating. Aristotle writes about them. Plato writes about them.
Yes.
But here's the interesting thing. So, they're also, this is funky. They're fatherless. I was reading this. They're fatherless children of Nyx, or the character Night. Who's the other famous fatherless creature we read about in Beowulf? It's Grendel. Like, that whole thing is fascinating to me. But anyway, these fates have this like primordial force that seems to transcend even the will of the gods. And there seems to be in classical studies a lot of debates about the power of the fates relative to the power of the gods. Regardless, fate isn't an idea in book 3. Fate is spoken out loud, mainly by Nestor, numerous times, or a few times, key times. So I mention this because if Telemachus is growing up and widening his world, what better way to do that than to both physically leave your geographical home, see other ways humans in the world interact, other ways to see humans pray to the gods, and then hear about this other, even more transcendent force. So his life in sort of imaginative landscape or moral landscape after book 3, if he listens to all this, has become enlarged exponentially. And I think that's a huge, my lingering question, what's the point of book 3? I think a lot of it is it enlarges Telemachus's worldview to include different things in nature and supernature. But what that means too is because we're seeing through Telemachus's eyes and learning about the landscape, the same is true for us as readers, that we're in a world where anywhere you go, there's very different behavior. He didn't know that. He never left his house. And then there's different ways to deal with gods. And then there's this notion of fate that seems to even transcend that. So I think both for Telemachus and the reader after book 3, there's just lots possible now. Now we have no idea. And that's like really exciting. It's not great if you're Telemachus, but it's really exciting if you're the reader, I think.
Yes. That's good. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of the fate, but as you're talking about this, there are a couple key scenes for that. I remember Nestor talking about his own, and we didn't get into this, but a portion of the chapter goes into the details about how they all the different kings and soldiers made their way back home. And Nestor goes into detail about how he could tell something was up with this fight between Menelaus and Agamemnon and their men trying to decide whether to stay. They held a meeting at midnight. Who does that? Everyone's drunk. That's insane. And Nestor knew that the gods had something in store. It was fated that something bad was going to happen. So he said, I got my guys and we got out of there, and indeed he arrived home first. Like his journey, Odysseus' journey is all about 10 years of whipping all around the world, trying to get back home. Nestor, boom, they're straight home. They didn't even stop for gas, and they're there and it's over. But there was a fate thing. Like he had his, sort of his finger in the air and you could feel, something bad was coming and he didn't want to be a part of it. And he got out of there. So there's a couple scenes like that. And, in the one, too, that you mentioned already about that hour fated for Clytemnestra to give in.
Yeah.
So that's good.
I just think it's how we actually learn. Like a. Oh, go ahead, Paul. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting.
And that's how we learn about the world, right? And which is your other point. That's how we still learn about the world. That's why our students are on all the social media apps that they are. I mean, one of the reasons is you want to know what's going on out there, and you find out how kids and adults interact with each other, and whatever other people groups you're interested in. If you're following the NHL or something, you want to know how Sportsland works and elite athletes work. You're just consuming stories, consuming, and that's what Telemachus gets. It's dead the same, and Nestor sits him down and says, I'll tell you how it happened, and now Telemachus is smarter about the world of adults. Yeah.
I think, that old joke that if there were cell phones in the time of Seinfeld, most of the Seinfeld episodes wouldn't work. I think if there was cell phones in the Odyssey, Telemachus would just need to look at his location and be like, oh yeah, you want to know where Dad is? He's with this nymph. You probably don't want to know. He's fine. He's at the mall. He's
Dad, the video's on. Dad, the video's on. Turn it off.
But he has to. But even though our kids have cell phones, we all know that like the actual maturation that they need to experience has to happen outside of their phone and their room and their school and their town. I mean, it has to be transcendent of all that. And I think, I don't know. This is a poem where like we just did book 6 today, and I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but it's most people that teach it that aren't crazy like Paul and I skip book 6. But there's all kinds of like nuggets. And I think book 3 is one of those too. Like you could kind of skip it or summarize. but anyway, we're just talking about what it means to grow up. And with students, like, is there a more important conversation than that? Right.
Yeah. No, there's not. I don't think there is. And there's even something, it's not, I don't know. It's sort of like ambulance chasing, maybe, to watch the detail. And I don't really have a surprising quote, but it's the scenes that stand out, is the great detail that the chapter goes into the sacrifices, which is how I sort of frame that out for my students. Look at this thing. It's really something. And they bring out a metal worker to gild the horns with gold, like it's this technical skill thing and they're going to burn this thing. And then Pisistratus' older brother, Thrasymedes, comes out here with a big axe,
Yeah.
When the prayers were said and all the grain was scattered, Thrasymedes in a flash swung the axe and at one blow cut through the neck tendon,
Yeah. Kyle was paralyzed. I mean, I think we've been very friendly to our vegan listeners until now. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
But
now it's Apocalypse Now. That scene.
But also, like, this is it's very like organic butchery. Like this animal, every part of the animal has a purpose, and it's either consumed or offered in a sacrifice to the gods. So I don't know. It's there's nothing, both with the animal and the poem, there's nothing wasted. So
no, and even something so grand as killing all of these bulls they do is not even enough. They add some gold to it, as well. There's more to give, and then the bleeding, the wailing of the women, and Pisistratus cut her throat across, and the black blood ran, and life ebbed from her marrow. The carcass now sank down, and they disjointed the shoulders and the They just go in and they wrap them and burn them and eat them, and they're pouring out some portion of it, just throw it in the fire, just burn it. No one's going to eat it. And then they cut off pieces that they do eat. It's great. And I found my students, sort of interested in this, in the mechanics of how this works. And so they're learning, and you can imagine Telemachus sitting there watching, maybe with his mouth hanging open, like, what on earth is happening? This is really gruesome. And it's something, maybe your students just pass on, maybe they don't want to hear it, but others sometimes are captivated by it. It's a connection with the world and with animals and with their food even. We're so distant from that. One summer teaching, I worked on a farm in Essex, Massachusetts, and there was a chef who ran it, and we slaughtered chickens every Thursday, about 20 chickens. And I've been so far from anything like this. But, at 1 o'clock that day, they were all running around pecking the dirt. At 6 o'clock that evening, they were in an ice chest, heading down to Boston to a restaurant, literally.
Yeah.
And it's something our students don't experience. So again, as a way in, there's a religious thing to this that they may be interested in, just how the religion works, the what is owed to the gods, and then also just a living in the world in a raw, direct contact sort of way that's described here. That's I don't know. That's eye-opening. That's interesting. And certainly for students, it's broadening. It's broadening his mind, broadening his world. I don't know. I don't know if he went to church all those years, while he's waiting for his dad to come home. Maybe he was just sitting at home on, Sunday mornings or Saturday nights, whatever. But he's at church now on the beach, with these bulls and the axe, and seeing religion. You have to see that. You have to deal with it. And I say that, Mr. You have to know whatever your religious background or commitments, end up being, even if they're nothing, you have to deal with it. Like, it's something you have to take on, as a person.
Yeah. And we could go down so many rabbit holes, but the last thing I want to say is there was a time where, for the very first time, I visited my then girlfriend, now wife's house, or like friends growing up, and you go to their houses, and then some part of you, consciously or not even consciously, realizes they cook differently than I do, than my mother does, or my father does. They sit around the table differently. They have TV trays and watch TV. Some people, they do this or that. And like, your world gets a little bigger. And then the key to the Odyssey is, what is it like going home after leaving home? And we're getting ahead of ourselves. But Telemachus has that experience. And so that's part of growing up too, is seeing home with different eyes. And the only way you can do that is books like book 3 happening to you.
Yes. That is very, very well put. And so directly, if you're trying to hold the story to a plot, Telemachus doesn't directly learn what he's there to learn, but he grows and he expands, and he does hear that his father is great. He also hears from Nestor that he looks a lot like his father. There's some encouragement in that, I think. You are your father's son. I can verify. I've seen you both now, and that's a little something he takes with him, and that's real life. That's how real life. That's how real life works. It's not a mechanical thing that can be out in a spreadsheet exactly.
Right.
So
that was pretty good for a chapter that most people skim over. So if any of you are listening and wondering what was it like when Paul and Jay worked together, it was a lot of this and not a lot of grading. But it was nice.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still kind of there now that we're back. There are a lot of papers I have not grading right now, this moment. And I'm very happy to leave it that way.
Yeah. Hey, this was really nice, Paul. Thanks for your time.
Yes. Yeah, Jay, thank you. Thank you again. Thanks for your insights into this and just sharing how this live is happening in your class even this year. So, all right. Yeah. Hey, we'll catch you next time. Book 4, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about book 4.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Paul. Have a good one. Bye-bye.